In early California, we love to have an old-timer tell us a story because it dragged our troubles away from our thoughts, which is the healthiest thing a body can do. We don't take time enough to do that nowadays, why we get sick sometimes. So I'd like to ask you to come back with me to 1865 in Angels Camp, California. And old Jim Blaine would get comfortably and sociably charged and tell the story of his grandfather's old ram. Here's how it sounded. There never was a bullier old ram than he was. Grandfather fetched him from Illinois from a galoot by the name of Filkins. I just remember his first name. But he was a stump, that Filkins. He was a deacon, Baptist. He was a rustler, too. Fella had to get up rather early to get the jump on old Filkins. And he married a Smith, mighty fine family, them Smiths. Not a Sacramento Smith. This was an Indiana Smith. Them Sacramento Smiths is nobodies. Grandfather got that old ram all fenced in, and he dropped a 10-cent piece there in the grass. And he was a-stooping over looking for that 10-cent piece when the ram noticed him in that attitude and took it for an invitation. But Grandfather didn't notice the ram. And here he come, busting off the ridge with business in his eye. No, it wasn't a Smith. It was a Jefferson is what it was. Now, old Miss Jefferson, that was a good soul. Had a glass eye and used to lend it to old Miss Wagner, who hadn't any to receive company in. But they weren't big enough. Miss Jefferson had a number 7, and Miss Wagner was excavated for a 14. So when Miss Wagner weren't noticing why, it would get twisted around in the socket, look up maybe out to one side, every which way. Whilst the other one was looking straight ahead as a spyglass. Oh yes, one little wink in that handmade eye would lay over. Well, grown people didn't mind it, but it mostly always made the children cry. She tried packing it in raw cotton, but it didn't seem to work. Somehow the cotton would get loose and stick out. Looks so kind of awful, the children couldn't stand it. And she was always dropping it out, turning up her old dead light on the company empty and making everybody so uncomfortable because she didn't know when it hopped out, being blind on that side, you see. So somebody'd have to hunch her and say, "Your game eye is fetched loose, Miss Wagner, dear." Then they'd all have to sit and wait till she jammed it back in again, wrong side out as a general thing. The wrong side out didn't make much difference, really, because the glass eye was sky blue on the front side and gilded on the back side. So when Miss Wagner would get excited, why, it would begin to whirl, and it would flash yeller and blue and yeller. No, it weren't a Jefferson. It was a Hagedorn is what it was. Now, Sarah Hagedorn, there was a woman. She could heft a barrel of flour faster than I could flip a flapjack. And she was friends with Lem, my cousin Lem. Lem was uptown one day with his dog. What was that dog's name? Lem was leaning up against the scaffolding, drunk or sick or something. There was an Irishman up on the second floor with a hod full of bricks. That Irishman's foot slipped down, he come, bricks and all. Lit on a perfect stranger. Knocked the living aspirations right out of him. It was an accident, they said. Well, there ain't no such thing as an accident, but don't have the divine hand of providence to it. The object of that providence was to save the Irishman. For if the stranger hadn't have been there, the Irishman had have been killed. So then you might want to ask, if it was providence, why weren't the dog appointed? Well, for a very good reason. The dog would have seen him coming. You can't appoint a dog to a special providence. What was that dog's name? And I had an uncle got himself killed up here once. It was just awful. The poor man never had any insurance, and he was always sorry about it afterwards. It was on the 4th of July, and this uncle of mine, all full of patriotism, opened his mouth to hurrah, and a rocket went right down his throat. Well, before he had a chance to ask for a glass of water to quench the thing, it blew up. And for 24 hours it rained buttons recognizable as his. Well, a man cannot have an experience like that and be entirely cheerful for the rest of his life. And there was a fellow went to see that Dr. Tushmaker up in Virginia City to have his tooth out. Dr. Tushmaker was very good at his craft. He used to practice pulling teeth on iron rakes. Well, a patient came in and sat in the chair. The dentist pulled and the tooth wouldn't come. but the patient's right foot come up. And then I said, "What are you doing that for?" He said, "I don't know. I can't help it." "Well, then you go home, come back in a week. I'll take care of you." During a week, old Dr. Tushmaker, he invented an instrument combining the properties of the screw, the lever, the wedge, the hammer, and the inclined plane. Well, the patient came back and sat in the chair. One turn of the crank, and out came that tooth. Its roots were hooked under the patient's right big toe. And his entire skeleton was extracted with the tooth. They had to send him home in a pillowcase. But no matter, old Dr. Tushmaker, he got a patent on that instrument. Yes, as a turkey deboner. I think that's what Leslie was talking about. I'm not sure. I'd like to share you a program, a little piece that I don't often get to share. On my birthday, I do it. Incline Village, I do it. It's where I live. They can't run me off. And here, once in a while, when I can get away with it. And Marie asked if I would share this little piece that I wrote to Reverend Twitchell. It was never published. It has been pirated since. You can find it now, but it was never published. It wasn't meant to be published. I was writing to Reverend Twitchell to show how parlor talk has not changed over the centuries. No, just the English language has changed a little, really. It's a burlesque of a diary that Samuel Pepys kept in the time of Queen Elizabeth. So if you bear with me and indulge me, I'll try to stumble through it with you. Easter night, Her Majesty the Queen partook of fantasy, as she sometimes had, and invited to her closet certain playwrights and authors, these being Lord Bacon, His Worship Sir Walter Raleigh, Mr. Ben Jonson, and the child Francis Beaumont, who being but 16 was still speaking his Latin tongue, having not yet learned English. In a strange mixing of truly mighty blood, the Queen also invited the meanest of sinners, to wit, the Duchess of Bilgewater, 22 years of age, the Countess of Granby, 36, her daughter, Lady Helen, 16, and two maids of honor, Lady Boothie, 65, and Lady Dilberry, having just turned 70. I, being Her Majesty's cupbearer, had no choice but to remain and hold conversation with this coarse lot. In the heat of the talk, it befell that one did break wind, yielding an exceedingly mighty and distressful fragrance, whereat all did turn toward the Queen, who stated, "Verily, in mine 68 years I have not heard a fellow fart such as this. It seemeth by the great sound and clamor of it, it must be male, and the belly that lurked behind such a deed as that must now be fallen flat against the spine of him who hath delivered so stately and so vast a bulk. Pray thee, let the author confess to the offspring. Will my Lady Dilberry testify?" "My God, your grace, had I room for such a thundergust within mine ancient bowels, I could not discharge the same and live to thank the Lord for it. 'Twas not I that brought forth this rich overmastering fog, this fragrant gloom. Pray ye, seek ye further. Perhaps Lady Boothie hath done the company this favor. Madam, my limbs are feeble with the weight and drouth of 65 winters, and it behooveth me to be tender unto them. In the providence of God, had I contained that wonder, forsooth I'd have given the entire evening to dribbling it forth, not launching it sudden in its matchless might, taking mine own life with violence. In sooth, it was not I. In God's name, who hath favored us? Has it come to pass that a fart shall fart itself? Not one such as this, I trust. Young Master Beaumont? No, 'twould have wafted him to heaven like so much goose down. Could it be ye little Lady Helen? Nay, Nay, thou would have to tickle thy tender maidenhead with many a mousy squeak before thou learn to blow a hurricane like this. Was it you, my learned and ingenious Johnson? Such a blast never hath mine ears saluted, though such a stench so all-pervading and immortal. 'Twas not a novice that did it, your majesty, but one of veteran experience. In sooth, it was not I. Then there was a silence, and each did turn toward the worshipful Sir Walter Raleigh, that brown, embattled swashbuckler, who rising up did smile. Most gracious majesty, 'twas I that did it, but indeed was so poor and frail a note compared with such as I'm wont to furnish, that in sooth I was ashamed to call the weakling mine. It was nothing less than nothing, madam, but had I come prepared, I'd have delivered something worthy. Bear with me, please, your grace, till I can make amends. He then delivered himself of such a godless and rock-shivering blast that all were fain to stop their ears, and following it did come so dense and foul a fog that what came before it did seem a poor and trifling thing beside it. Then saith he, feigning that he blushed and was confused, I perceive that I am weak today, and cannot justice do unto my powers. And he sat down, as if to say, there, it is not much, but let he who hath an arse follow that. That's for Marie.